This is Silent Stories Updates, where real emotions meet unbelievable truths. Today's story is one that will shake you to the core. It's a story about control, obsession, and the kind of revenge no one could ever imagine. So sit back and listen carefully, because what you're about to hear really happened. I never thought the woman who smiled at me every morning while watering her roses would one day stand in a courtroom, accused of burning my entire life to ashes. But there she was, Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, who once bragged about keeping our neighborhood perfect, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit, her eyes cold and empty as the judge read out her sentence. That day, as I sat on the courtroom bench, the memories came flooding back: the smell of smoke, the sound of wood cracking, the blinding orange glow that consumed everything I owned. And across the street that night, through the haze of fire and fear, I saw her, standing, watching. Let me take you back to how it all began. 2 years earlier, my wife Claire and I moved into Maple Creek Estates, a beautiful neighborhood with manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and a long list of rules that came with living there. After 20 years of military service, I was ready for peace, a place to settle down, start fresh, and finally build a home. The first person to welcome us was Karen. She was in her mid-50s, neat as a pin, and had that kind of forced smile that looks friendly but feels fake. She handed me a thick binder and said proudly, "Welcome to Maple Creek. We take pride in perfection here." I remember thinking, all right, rules are fine. I've lived by stricter ones before. But I had no idea those same rules would one day cost me everything. At first, it was fine. We painted the fence, kept the grass short, and paid our HOA dues on time. But then, the notes started appearing on our door. Your trash bin is visible from the street. Your mailbox color doesn't match HOA standards. Your grass exceeds 2 inches. Harmless, right? That's what I thought too. But each note became more personal, more aggressive. I come home to find Karen standing on our lawn with a clipboard, measuring, photographing, and sometimes even talking to the neighbors about our non-compliance. I tried to keep the peace. I'd seen people like her before, people who needed control to feel powerful. But what I didn't know was just how far she was willing to go. When our daughter Lily was born, life became brighter. The sleepless nights, the baby giggles, it was all worth it. But for Karen, it was just another excuse to find something wrong. She started picking on Claire while I was at work. One afternoon, Claire called me crying because Karen had yelled at her for hanging a small baby wind chime on our porch. According to Karen, it disrupted the community's visual harmony. I was furious. The next morning, I walked across the street to talk to her calmly. "Karen," I said, "this is getting ridiculous. We're not breaking any laws." She smiled and said, "Rules are what keep this neighborhood beautiful. John, if you can't handle that, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." That was the first time I saw the real Karen, the one behind the smile. A week later, we got a $500 fine in the mail. The reason? Parking too close to the curb in front of our own house. I started keeping records, photos, videos, timestamps. I wasn't going to let her bully us out of our home. But the more I resisted, the harder she pushed. It wasn't just notes anymore. We started hearing whispers at HOA meetings. One board member, who was clearly terrified of her, hinted that Karen had been known to make problems disappear. The final straw came one morning when we found the word "eyesore" spray painted across our garage door. The police said there wasn't enough evidence to accuse anyone. But deep down, I knew who did it. Claire begged me to move. I refused. "She's not driving us out of our home," I told her. I wish I had listened. The night it happened was calm, eerily calm. Claire had taken Lily to her parents' house for the weekend. I was home alone, finishing some small repairs in the garage. Around midnight, I went to bed. The house was quiet, peaceful, until it wasn't. I woke to the smell of smoke and the sharp sound of the fire alarm screaming through the dark. Flames were already crawling across the ceiling. The heat was unbearable. I tried to grab the fire extinguisher, but it was useless. The fire was spreading too fast. I barely made it out through the side window, coughing and covered in soot. My hands were blistered, my lungs burned. But I was a live dot, and as I stumbled onto the lawn, gasping for air, I looked across the street. Karen was standing there in her robe, arms crossed, her face lit by the orange glow of the fire. She wasn't panicking like the others. She wasn't shouting or crying. She was watching. That image will haunt me forever. The firefighters arrived within minutes. But it was too late. The house collapsed in on itself. Everything we owned turned to ash. The only thing left standing was the mailbox, still the wrong shade of beige that Karen had once complained about. The investigation started immediately. The fire chief told me it looked suspicious. Accelerant residue was found near the back porch. A week later, the police knocked on my door. They found something on a neighbor's security camera. The footage showed a figure walking around my yard just before the fire started. The person wore a hoodie, but then just for a second the camera caught a clear image of her face. Karen, I remember staring at the detective in disbelief. I wanted to scream, to punch something, but I just sat there, silent. They arrested her the next morning. The news spread like wildfire, no pun intended. The same neighbors who once feared her were now calling her crazy, dangerous, evil. At the trial, her lawyer tried to claim she was mentally unwell from the stress of HOA responsibilities. But the evidence was overwhelming. She had bought gasoline that morning. Her fingerprints were on the lighter found near the scene. When the verdict was guilty of arson, attempted manslaughter, and destruction of property, I felt nothing, just emptiness. And then, as she was being led away, she turned toward me and said, "You ruined this neighborhood, John. I just cleaned it up." That was the moment I realized she didn't feel guilt. She felt justified. After the trial, I had to rebuild not just my home, but my life. Claire and Lily moved in with her parents for a while. I stayed at a small rental apartment, surrounded by the smell of new paint and loneliness. There were nights I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow reminded me of fire. The dreams were the worst, reliving that night over and over again. But in time, something beautiful happened. The community, the same one that once ignored our struggles, came together to help. They donated furniture, clothes, money. A local contractor rebuilt what we lost, refusing to charge a dime. It was like the fire had burned away the fear that Karen had created. 6 months later, Claire and I decided not to return to Maple Creek. We bought a small piece of land outside the city, a quiet place with no HOA, no rules, no Karens. We built a modest home there, surrounded by trees and open sky. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I'll never forget the first night we moved in. The air smelled like pine instead of smoke. Claire sat beside me on the porch, holding Lily, and said softly, "She burned our house, but not our spirit." And she was right. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local town meeting about HOA abuse. I didn't want revenge. I wanted awareness. I stood before a small crowd and told my story. I told them that rules aren't meant to control, they're meant to protect. I told them that sometimes power in the wrong hands can destroy more than property, it can destroy lives. When I finished, a man in the back stood up and said, "You didn't lose your home, sir. You just found out what really matters." Those words stuck with me. Now, years later, when I drive past Maple Creek, Karen's old house sits empty. The grass is overgrown, the paint peeling. The neighborhood she once ruled with fear is now silent. Her obsession with perfection ended up leaving nothing but decay behind. Sometimes I stop for a moment, just to look. I remember the good times, the laughter, the sound of Lily's first words echoing through our living room, and I smile. Because no matter what she took, she couldn't take that away. I've learned that a house is just wood and nails, but a home, that's love, family, and the memories you carry with you no matter where you go. Karen thought she could destroy us with fire, but all she did was forge something stronger. I rebuilt my life from ashes, not just with bricks, but with gratitude for every neighbor who helped, for every new sunrise that reminded me that life goes on. And now, whenever I see a flame, whether it's a candle, a campfire, or a sunrise, I don't see destruction anymore. I see renewal, because sometimes the fire that breaks you is the same fire that shapes who you become. So if you're going through your own fire right now, whatever it may be, remember this. You can lose everything and still rise again. Because home isn't a place. It's the people you love, and that can never be burned away. This was today's story on Silent Stories Updates. Real people, real emotions, real lessons. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us all of the strength we carry inside. Until next time, stay kind, stay safe, and keep your hearts warm.